Hello, and welcome back to Awakened People of Earth. I'm James.
And I'm Liz.
And today we're going to talk about some interesting information that we've been receiving through Qhht sessions. If you don't know what Qhht is, it stands for Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. Liz, why don't you tell us like a brief overview of what that is, what that means?
Awesome. Thank you. So Dolores Cannon, who is a very well-known author, discovered and created quantum healing hypnosis technique. And this is a wonderful healing technique accessing the quantum realms. People have been healed of cancer, other things, diabetes, all sorts of things through these sessions and this technique. So she used this to help people with healing.
Wonderful. I think that covers it really well, but what I'd like to do, is we've kind of done in some of the other interviews, is I'd like to go to the actual website where you will find this information, and this is the Qhht official website. I'll make sure to link that down below so that you can link to it. So if you're to look this up, you're going to go Google and find out what Qhht is. This is the very best place, really should be the only place, because it's the official site. This is Dolores Cannon's Qhht. There are many things that are similar to Dolores Cannon's technique, I will say, like there's other traditional hypnosis and other things that they'll kind of do similar stuff, but this is a very specific program she developed, and it has brought through tons and tons of information. So as you get on to her website here, you'll see that it kind of gives you a little overview of what that is, which is kind of what Liz already kind of briefed you on. But there was a couple of things on here I found to be really interesting that they touch on that I think is important for us to kind of focus on. And that is at this third paragraph here. It says, Qhht is a powerful tool to access that all-knowing part of ourselves that has been called the higher self, the oversoul, even the soul itself. When we incarnate on Earth, we forget our previous lives in connection to our souls and the source. Qhht enables all people from any background, culture, religion, or belief system to engage with what she called the subconscious, since it resides beyond the conscious mind. Dolores' term, the subconscious, which she later abbreviated to the SC, is the greater part of ourselves that is always connected to the source, or God, and has unlimited knowledge and an unlimited ability to heal the physical body. Sometimes mental and physical ailments are rooted in trauma from past lives. Sometimes they are connected to lessons being learned in a person's present life. The SC reveals the cause and will assist according to any soul's particular lessons. Now, this really sums it up quite well, I think, because this is what's really important to know or note about Qhht. So this isn't just about getting hypnotized and then going into a past life regression, right? So what we really focus on, what's really important in this, is you go through that. Should that come up, it can be past lives, it could be current lives, but the most important thing is that we get into that subconscious, as she called it, or the higher self, right? And that's where we gain real knowledge and real deep healing. Is there anything more you'd like to add to that, or maybe just what your experience with that has been?
The only thing that I'd like to add is, yes, so the term past lives is something we're all familiar with, but a lot of the lifetimes that my clients have visited are future lives, are parallel lives. So I like to use the term parallel lives.
Yeah, and parallel would be and this for some of you, this may be kind of new information, but just to kind of understand, so when we think of time as a linear thing. Like it's, this is the past, this is the start, right? And then it goes through cycles, and then we're at the end. When in actuality, what we're learning in a lot of these quantum levels is that it is not linear. And when she says parallel, it seems as though these lives are all happening at the same time. So even when we talk about past lives, we're actually really having all of these lives at the same time that we're having this life. And I know that's
yeah.
What does that really mean, right? So just grab onto what you can, and that's okay. And maybe at some point it will make sense. I know for Liz, it was, we would have these discussions, and she kind of look at me like, like too much, man. Like I'm not ready for this information. And then one day it just kind of clicked, right? Is that
right?
You'd say that happened, and then
Absolutely. And that's when I realized that it's all happening simultaneously at the same time. And that's why I like to use the term parallel lives.
Right. So it's just another way to kind of understand it, and it helps too when you're thinking about like getting into quantum, fields or quantum healing. That's what we're doing, is we're not necessarily time traveling, which it kind of feels like time travel, but we're actually tapping into these lives that are a part of you that are happening even now, right? So, but we found some really great stuff. So if you look into this, I'd say definitely look into Dolores, and as you get onto that website, there's a lot more information about her on there. She's written so many books, and they're just super amazing, just really, really great information. She's really, really wonderful to watch even speak. There's lots of YouTube videos out there too about her, with her interviewing or being interviewed and talking to people and just giving lectures and stuff. She's just awesome. And like even reading her books, it's kind of like how she talks. Like they're really easy to read. They have, and like I said, there's great. There's some of it's about past life stuff. Oh, I would say, so just like one that I found really interesting, if you find this interview with her, she actually talked to Nostradamus. And that was really interesting. And not only was she with a client who had worked with Nostradamus, that's how she kind of had her introduction, but all of a sudden he approached her client and was like, he wanted to speak to Dolores. And then he was able to utilize Dolores, and Dolores would go back through different clients to actually help to decode all of Nostradamus's prophecies. So if you don't know, like in that era, in that time, there was like, I think it was the Spanish Inquisition or whatnot. Yeah. So it was really dangerous for him to talk about any of this stuff. It would have meant instant death. So anyway, that was just a really, really cool, I think, a bit of information that she brought through. Really, really cool topic. So that could be for another day. But today we wanted to talk a little bit more about even some of Liz's journey and a little bit of my journey as far as, working with QHHT, some of the information that's come up. And then at the end of this, Liz has some really interesting information that came up through one of her clients. We're not going to give their name away or anything, but we just wanted to share that information. We felt that was important to get out there to other people. So how about we start here, Liz? Why don't we start off with like kind of how you got into QHHT? Because we have a little bit different journey as far as that goes, but for Liz, it was very specific. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came about and why you now practice it?
Thank you, James. So at the end of 2020,
no longer will the insects have domain over the surface world.
I was guided to receive a session from a local person named Angela who started her QHHT practice, and I had no idea what QHHT really was. I thought it was past life regression because James had tried to get quite a few QHHT sessions, and it just didn't really happen. So I really didn't have an understanding of what QHHT was. So I accepted the guidance. I followed through on it. And in January, I had my first QHHT session as a client. And during that session, Angela said to me, Liz, the reason why I offer QHHT is because it's a healing technique. And I was like, well, tell me more. Then she proceeded to share with me that through Dolores Cannon's work, people were being healed of all sorts of things that Western medicine wasn't able to heal. People were healed of cancer. New teeth were growing in where people had been missing teeth. Cartilage had been replaced. Diabetes. You name it, people were being healed of it. And I thought, oh, how interesting. But I didn't really understand it that day either. So during that session, she did a body scan on me, which is part of a QHHT session. And it had brought up that I was experiencing irritable bowel syndrome. And it discussed why I was experiencing that and what I needed to do to be a part of the healing process. It also addressed something that happened in my life that was some trauma that I had been carrying with me. And it clarified what it was. It really helped me understand what that agreement was and why I experienced that and what my part in all of that was. And it was able to help me heal from that trauma. So about 5 days after my QHHT session, I realized that I no longer experienced irritable bowel syndrome, that I had been completely healed. No matter what I ate, my stomach no longer hurt. And I was like, oh, wow, I need to learn this technique to help other people. If this can help me, I know it can help other people. So that's where my journey started. And I signed up just about 5 days later after my first QHHT session. And I told James about it. And he's like, what? You signed up to learn it? And I'm like, yeah, this is something that is going to really help people. Like, I can help people find a way to healing.
And it's funny because, mind you, like QHHT is something for me, I had already kind of looked into a lot. Like I said, I watched a lot of Dolores interviews, and I was kind of into past life stuff, and so that was really an interesting path to go down anyway. And then I just found QHHT, and I found Dolores and all this stuff, and I thought, man, this sounds really cool. I'd love to do this as well. And I had actually tried to set up a couple of QHHT sessions that just didn't work out. I'm sure divinely so. And when Liz tells me that she's going in for one, I was like, oh, okay, well, cool, and I couldn't wait to hear what hers was about. And then she tells me like a few days later that she's signing up for it. I'm like, you're learning it? Like you're gonna I was like, holy cow. I'm like, well, I would love to learn it. And, so she's like, well, let's look at like the first day of stuff or whatever, just to kind of get a sample and see if this is something that we both wanted to do, which I kind of already knew I wanted to. But, after a couple of videos of Dolores, I'm like, definitely want to learn this. Like it's amazing. It's fascinating. I'd love to be a part of this. But even then I didn't know how profound and really how powerful the healing can be until I started learning it through the program. So really cool stuff. The program was really good. We learned a lot through this. And it was really great to see Liz like really get into this too. And that, for her, it really was about like the healing part of this. And so that was really neat. And then in the course of this, of course, we've witnessed and experienced some really neat stuff. So, just to kind of bring up maybe one of those sessions. So Liz, why don't you tell us a little bit, tell us a couple of things that came up during your QHHT. I know you talked about the IBS and some of the healing parts of that, but there was some interesting past life stuff too that was really cool in this too. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what came up during your session?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to share. Yes, so information comes up during these sessions. So not only is it healing, but there's a lot of interesting information that comes up. Sometimes through the lifetimes and sometimes just by asking the higher self. People have curiosity questions. But what came up during this particular session where I was the client were the lifetimes. So the first lifetime, I was a giant and I saw these blue beings come down, and it was somewhere in a place like India. A long time ago, India. And everybody knew who these blue beings were. So that was something really, really cool.
And they had multiple arms, right?
Yeah, they had multiple arms.
So has anybody ever seen those pictures? We've seen images of that, I think in a lot of the Hindu texts and stuff too. Well, Liz sees this in her lifetime. She remembers being there and seeing one of these blue beings. It's wild. I mean, again, just take with this all with a grain of salt. Whatever you need from this, it's fine. But this is still really cool information or an interesting thing to see anyway.
Right. And you have to keep in mind that I'm not a person that's very good with history or reads a lot. I don't. So I'm a business major, and I've read a lot of business articles and things related to that side of the world, but not so much about history and stories and things like that. So I really didn't know much about it. The second lifetime, I was in a place where they weren't human. Let's just say they weren't human. I was a blue being, and it looked very similar to the beings in that movie Avatar. Pretty similar, or what the beings look like there. So that was quite interesting. And then I was able to go to a third lifetime during that session as well. And from my understanding, I've not seen it, But when I was shown a picture of it, it was exactly. So James watches a lot of movies, so he completely knew what I was talking about. So the third lifetime, I look like the goblins from Lord of the Rings. Is that right? The goblins?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
But based on the way you described it, for sure. That's
Yes.
what she said, and then I showed her an image. She's like, yeah, it kind of looked like those. Well,
Yeah.
what was interesting, too, is that even when she talked about this, it was like, so the way you kind of see them in the movie, it's kind of how she experienced it, too. It was just about, like, war.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's even the way it was, and it was really intense. And you think, wow, that's really scary. But for Liz, it wasn't that way, and there was a message that came out. Because, again, this is the other thing, too, to understand, is that when these lifetimes come up, there's always lessons or purposes behind this. And the higher self, or the subconscious, is what we talk to later. They're the ones that choose what comes through, right? This is like, when we say higher self, as it's described in there, we're saying is this. Think of this as like, this is the larger, they call it the oversoul. So this is like the you, that is the all existing you, that's been through all the lifetimes, that's connected to all of these experiences, and is truly there to guide you, because it's you. So it brings through what it feels is like the most appropriate, right? That's kind of how we do it in the session. So it brought this through as a lesson. And then what was the lesson in this?
So the lesson, and all 3 lifetimes tied into this one lesson, was to live in the present, to live in the now, not to be living in the past, because I had originally come with the question, regarding some past trauma that I was noticing I was still carrying around. Not to live in the future, so don't worry about the future, but to live in the present, and that would be the most joyful place to be. And that has been my journey this year in 2021, is to really be in the present. And I would say it's definitely been healing for me.
Yeah. There was a big difference after the session. So, and that was the first session she had, which is what encouraged her to actually learn it, right? And then when we were going through the class together, I did a session with her where I led it, and then she went under, and that one was really interesting too. So Liz clearly feels very connected to star seeds or star beings, right? And we did a whole video before about that. You should check that out if you haven't seen it. But so this next one, of course, she's also off planet. She's in a spaceship. And why don't you tell them what that was like?
Well, first, we were practicing, and I was James's first client.
Yes.
So he asked me where I was, and I could see this huge window. And it took me a while. Like, it was like I had to zoom out to see where I was. And I realized I was on a spaceship, and I told him I was on a ship. And he was like, okay, are you floating in the water? Are you underwater? I said, no, I'm in space.
Right. She said ship, and I automatically assumed like a ship. And I'm somebody who's into all that other stuff, but I didn't even think spaceship.
I was an insectoid.
Yes.
And it was quite interesting, because my purpose was to send test subjects down to other planets as we're trying to create a life, or make sure it's habitable, or figure out, what we needed to do to make it habitable. We were really observing the planets. And we dropped down in some ET looking beings onto this planet.
And by ET, you mean they look
like ET from the movie.
Like ET from the movie, not just extraterrestrials like these.
Yeah, look like ET from the movie, and we dropped those beings down into a planet that was mostly desert. It looked like desert, if you can imagine you'd be in a desert, but with big rocks. And we were testing them to see how they were surviving down there. And that was the whole purpose of my life at that time. And it was interesting, because James would ask where I would sleep. And I would say, well, we sleep in these pods within the ship. And the doors, like, you would slip into the side of the pod, and the door would close on the outside. And we would sleep there. What else did you ask? He asked about my friends and family.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did.
And what was it I said?
You were, I think you were like, what are those? Like, we don't have those. You were like, we don't have those like humans do. Like, it's not like that, because for them, it's, you know, they have their job or whatever it is that they do, and that's their main focus. It's not about friendship necessarily or family. You know, they kind of almost exist to do their job.
There's no emotions.
Yeah. No.
Being an insectoid, there were no emotions. It was just, it identified emotions as something that was actually human. And that species was not human, so it did not experience emotions. Right.
So really interesting stuff in that session too. And I don't remember I do remember the first lifetime that you went through. She was kind of started out almost like in a panic, but she had escaped. She was like a slave, and she had escaped. Now, this was a human lifetime. She was here on Earth, and she ended up being somebody who I guess had been sold into slavery for most of her life, and escaped. And then it was really interesting because it wasn't like a whole lot happened throughout the rest of the lifetime, other than just kind of learning to be like not a slave, you know, kind of. And then she ended up in like in an oasis, and you were leading an oasis. So it was like if people found this oasis, and you're thinking like a real oasis, like out in the middle of nowhere, like this thing existed somewhere, you know, away from like most civilization, but it was beautiful the way you described it. And then people would show up there, and she would help them, and that was basically how she spent the rest of her life. So it was really, really neat, really interesting. And so yeah, and then of course we brought in the higher self, and we received some more information. Do you remember what came up in the higher self information there?
I don't really remember, because it was only within a week or two of my first session, so I don't really remember that.
And I was pretty new, so you know, I think I was still learning like all the right questions to ask, and so that was a part of that. So yeah, that was pretty interesting though. So those were just a couple of examples of sessions that like Liz has been in. Now, since we've been practicing QHHT, we've had some really interesting information come through as well. And I mean things like, and again, they come from different, you know, all kinds of different backgrounds, but we've had Lemurian, you know, right? Like Lemuria. I don't know if you're familiar with Lemuria out there, but this is like a civilization that kind of predates Atlantis, and I think in some ways even intersects Atlantean civilizations, if you've heard of Atlantis. You know, and what I find interesting is, so when you talk about Atlantis and Lemuria, right? So a lot of the technologies that they used are things that we're beginning to kind of rediscover right now, you know, like we're rediscovering these technologies, like, and that is like a lot of the priestesses and stuff, a lot of them use sound and vibration, and that's a big focus back then. In crystal technologies, it's another big thing. And if you don't realize that we're still using crystal technology, just so you know, crystals are in your computers, right? You know, like that technology is powering a lot of I think it's in the chip technology and whatnot, but there's a lot of crystal technology in there. So we are still using it, where they're just using it a little bit differently, I think, than they did then. But like I had one in Lemuria where she was also like a priestess, and they would go to a temple and they would use their voice together, and that would create a certain frequency that would help everybody collectively. And that was really interesting. And that's a lot of what we find that we start doing even in our practice now. Like we do a lot with our sound healing and with music and with voice and stuff like that. So that's really, really interesting stuff. So what else have you come across, I guess, in some of these sessions that you'd like to share today that we could, you know, maybe it'd be helpful to other people?
In general, or
just whatever information. We'll just say more in general. We'll bring through some of the, we have some other information, so that's why she's kind of asking me. So we have some other information that we want to share, but it is a little more controversial, right? Kind of walks the line a bit. So we're going to do that more towards the end. And then that way, you know, you definitely can stick around for that. But if it's not something that you're really, you know, valuing or whatever, then you're free to, you know, carry on or whatever. But this is some interesting information. So before we go into that,
okay,
we'll go for more general stuff that's kind of come up too that you want to share.
Okay, so I can share just some interesting information that I find very interesting, and I did post some of the videos with, you know, permission from those clients that have this information. So something that I thought was really interesting was the pyramids on planet Earth and how they were used for energy. So there's a
that's cool.
session about how the pyramids are used for energy. There's a session I mentioned in Atlantis. There's been information coming through to help people heal. I had one gentleman who shared with me within the first 5 days of his first QHHT session how he went from using over 90 units of insulin per day down to 30, and how great he was feeling. So there's healing stories related to it. There's just so many interesting lifetimes that have come through. There has been messages that come through for me as a practitioner, and I don't ask any personal questions about myself. Sometimes the higher self, when I'm facilitating a session, just has a message for me regarding what's happening in my life, and helps give me confirmation.
Yeah. Well, no, that's good. I mean, because that's a lot of good information. I've had many of the similar experiences as well. I've seen, some of these lifetimes. A lot of them are just pretty simple. And Dolores calls them potato digging lifetimes, right? It just means they're simple, right? Because a lot of us, that's what we did. We were farmers, or we were, and even though at times, or from this perspective, we might say it was a rough life, I would say it was a simple life. And that's what a lot of us need to experience, because I think that's what we're feeling called back to do, is kind of get back to that simple life again. Everything's so high paced, and we're just constantly trying to get to the next, new, biggest, greatest thing. We miss life sometimes, and we forget how free and important it can feel, right? And I think a lot of that does come up through these sessions. I've also had them like address me, and so when she says we don't ask our personal questions, that's just to be very clear. We aren't like guiding people into past lifetimes. I'm not saying let's go to Egypt or let's go to this, right? And then I'm not asking questions that are about me, like, hey, tell me about myself, or is there any information like, we respect that as far as the client. It's their time, but sometimes that higher self will bring through information and kind of share that with you. So, and a good example of this too, if you want to see a lot of this, we have a few videos on our Center Me website, but also Suzanne Spooner. She's pretty well known now, and she works out here in Des Moines as well. She's a level 3 practitioner, been doing this for like 12 years. She's been doing this for a long time, learned from Dolores herself. So you can follow her or look at her YouTube page, and she's got a lot of really good information, and you'll kind of see where a lot of this comes up and why a lot of the material can just be, it's really wonderful. It's really interesting. So anyway, we just kind of wanted to share some of that. So I think that's kind of all I really want to touch on as far as just kind of getting an overview of QHHT, just in case it's something that you're interested in. And you can go on there. Like I said, if you're interested in learning, you can go to the official website. I advise that if it is something that you're interested in, look into it, because it's really, really good. The program, it's not super expensive, I don't think, for what you're doing, and you will get certified at the end of it, and then you have to do so many sessions before you're a full practitioner. So I got a few more left before I'm done with mine, but Liz knocked hers all out and went through the whole level 2 stuff. So just really neat stuff. Okay, guys, so we kind of had to cut because the camera, first of all, died. But then after talking, we decided that we actually wanted to create a different video for the other the controversial information. We just felt like this one kind of went as long as it really needed to go, and then this way you can watch it separately if you want as well. So we are going to do that on another video. So just want to thank everybody for joining us. If you made it through the whole video, thank you so much for being a part of this. And, and remember to like and subscribe, of course, as well, because that really helps out the channel and helps out all the information. So, and if you have anything else that you want us to talk about, or any other information or things that you're curious to know about, put it down in the comments. Let us know what you think about the video. Let us know if you've had QHHT, what you think about that, any of that kind of information, because it's just going to help as we're trying to grow the channel and decide on different content that we want to share. So thanks again for joining, and I just want to send everybody, blessings and love and light, of course, as always. So see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.